Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Snowpiercer. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I really appreciate this being the episode we finally get to see I think it makes sense, because obviously we kind of stacked up on what happened on Snowpiercer back-to-back episodes, and then, like I said, everything in one episode about what went down with Melanie. I appreciate that. I kind of figured that might be the direction they were going. I guess I wasn't expecting it to be at this point that we would get the episode. But regardless, obviously it's not the easiest thing, for Melanie. But what keeps her going is it doesn't matter if I survive this or not, because if I don't, the person who's cold-hearted, basically talking about Wilford, would use this as an opportunity to crush any hope. So it's like, I have to come through on this, because if I don't, it's just going to give Wilford more control and more ammo to use against us, because he wants to be important. He wants to feel important. And it's like, if there's a potential for humanity, for Earth to come back, then he loses what makes him special and being the one who saved humanity. So that's what that's all about. But obviously when she comes there, she ends up discovering bodies. One dude with the bullet in his head, which I was like, yeah, that probably, I don't know, like it's probably a suicide situation. But then she finds a lady's body who's like has a wrist cut, which you also have like the worst company in the case of, because of whether it's just, her starving, a combination of that plus the, just the solitude and the thinning air of like the, like how high up she is, as made her start seeing things. And of course, who would be the one person she ends up seeing first and foremost? None other than Wilford, being just a cheeky bastard, which I even love her. Even though it's all in her head, she's still being cheeky back to him by being like, oh yeah, you stole my train and everything. It's like, because he was like, oh yeah, like Ben and Javi, the Colombian. I mean, no, what was it? The Spaniard. And it's like, Javi's Colombian. And it's like, to be fair, Javi didn't even know we left you behind. In all honesty, he's like, it took 2 days before Javi found out that you weren't even on the train. So it was more so Ben and Melanie's decision, because we finally got the insight. Because I think that's what's so interesting too about how they present Wilford. At least, like, obviously when we first meet him, and it's just like, Melanie's looking like, oh my god, like what we were able to create. He's like, all right, now I'm only going to tell you this, like, this Snowpiercer is just as much as mine as it is yours. Now, I will never say that publicly, but it's like, he's kind of, but it's like, you let a lot of that slide. You're like, oh, like, it's interesting. And it seems like, hey, you're almost like a human. And then slowly but surely we see the whole self-grandizement, like, the ego, the narcissism, when it's like, Melanie's like, wait, you built this entire night car? We could use the supplies that you're using on this to, like, help. Like, these could be supplies for like 20 more people we could put on Snowpiercer. But for him, it's like, people are going to need a release and entertainment. It's like, once again, it's like, he wants to be like showered and treated like a king. Like, that's what the night car is for him. It's meant to be his personal playground. It's like, other people can come too, but when they come in, here, it's just, because they even talked about it last season, like, all the people he invited mainly to the train were, like, the rich and powerful, because he wanted, like, the higher class to be around him, to shower him with praise and love, and blah, 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 And, Melanie doesn't appreciate his approach to things, even saying, like, whoa, like, back off security a little bit. It's like, you don't want me to have all the people I want, because she wants a whole bunch of geneticists. But he's like, no, we need security. She's like, we don't need security. We don't need order. But for him, it's like, order is the most important thing on this train. Because order means power. Because that means there's a hierarchy. That means there's someone in control. That's what he really means. It's like, no. We need order, because I need to be the one who dictates the order. I need to be the one in control. The megalomaniac that he is. But it's like, she's like, all right, cut back. At least like 12 jackboots, like 12 people from security. That way I can get my geneticists, and I can also get their families aboard. So just do that. And he was like, you get 6. because it's a situation of hey, you either play ball or your family gets left behind. And it's like, this is someone who helped you make this real. Like, why would you threaten a person that, like, but for him, it's like, I think it's like, well, it's all above board. It's like, you're replaceable, Melanie. Like, he made it seem like she was so important, like, this is much mine as yours. It's like, at this point, it's like, no. It's mine. I let you have some of it, but at the end of the day, the bits I let you have, like what I'm claiming that it's just as much yours, is actually mine, that I'm letting you have, at least kind of stake your name in. Or something's like, so what was, I guess it's like the platitudes, but maybe it's just like the closer and closer to a reality it became, the more like narcissistic and egotistical he became. It was probably always there, but Melanie never saw it until it was like finally, like, I think when the clock is counting down, I think it's when she finally saw him for what he really was, and sadly, it was already too late by then. This also got me thinking, like, I'm surprised we've never gotten more about the, like, world beforehand, but I guess that's kind of the whole point, like, what the world was before is so gone, like, what's the point of imagining it? Like, there's bits of it in season 1, but even then, it's like, it's something that's never really covered, because you would think in the nature of the show, you would think you would flash back, kind of like a Lost situation. You would think you would kind of flash back to their lives before, but it's like, I think that's supposed to add more direness to it, of like, our life. I mean, they've been on Snowpiercer for like 7 years, so it's like the lives we had before, everyone else on the planet is dead, and like making it seem like that's such a distant memory that it's like, honestly, thinking back to it would be too painful, because it'd be a constant reminder of what we lost. So we never really get too much of an insight into, you hear about people, but I thought it was so interesting that we just never gotten insight into a lot of people. Even Andre, or like, this is like one of the instances of like us getting a look at Melanie. It's weird looking at the world not frozen over, So I just thought that was such an interesting aspect that I've never really realized until now. I was like, yeah, we've never really tackled that, but I think that's by design, because it makes it seem even more of a disconnect of like, oh, that life we had, that life, as Melanie saying in like the voiceover at the beginning, like we were sleepwalking. We're just kind of living our lives day by day, not realizing what was going to come next. Like, oh, we took it all for granted, essentially, So, but what sucks for Melanie's situation, getting back to it even more so, is the fact is, hey, not only am I running out of food, because, hey, there was an avalanche and my sled thing that had all my other supplies got buried, so I've got like a few packs of food and some candies that Ben snuck me. So it's like, oh, and she's got to ration that out, and then you have, her mind would go kind of to the darker place and manifest itself as Wilford to kind of poke at her. I mean, I think honestly, maybe that's her subconscious way of, because it's her mind kind of punishing her, like, oh, this would have never happened. Like, maybe things would have been different if you hadn't kind of betrayed Wilford and left so many people behind, including Alex. I think it's her own subconscious, but maybe it's also the thing of she created this Wilford in her head, because it's like, honestly, being pissed at him gives her something else to focus on, because it's like, yeah, you're so hungry. It's like, well, you can always turn to cannibalism, because that's where they were going. Because, hey, oh, there's that missing arm in the refrigerator. I wonder where that went off to. So, the lady was planning on killed her husband so that she could eat him, but it didn't work out that way. She couldn't bring herself to do it. And obviously, Wilford in her head is bringing up the similarities between, like, oh, this mother who was willing to do whatever and ended up leaving a child behind, but like Melanie's like, she was trying to do whatever she could to get back to her child. It's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, she couldn't eat her husband, so it's like, it kind of was all for nothing. She killed him, she sacrificed, sacrificed someone, and it was kind of all for nothing. And kind of making the parallels of like Melanie left him, sacrificed him, and ended up leaving her daughter behind. And it was like it's like you were only able to reunite with her because of me. So you should be a little grateful. To be fair, the only reason why you brought Alex along is because you knew eventually you crossed paths with Melanie and she'd be a good bargaining chip. You wanted the psychological warfare of bringing Alex with all her resentment towards her mom for leaving her behind. Which we and I also thought was interesting too, like, we get, like, the other side of the first episode of the show, kind of giving us that perspective on, like, the front side of things, what was really happening behind the scenes that no one else was aware of on, the other side of the train. he's the one that killed all the geneticists that she wanted to kind of bring aboard, just because she was like, okay, let's just get everyone aboard and let's go. But it's like, nope, had them all killed, because it's like, because they never really explained, like, how did other people find out. I don't remember if they explained that in season 1, how other people found out, but it's also like, yeah, it's like, I think she said at the time it was like 45 below, and it's like, so of course people are gonna like find out about this, like either someone, maybe they went over it in season 1. If you remember, do let me know. I don't remember anyone that coming up with how people found out about it. I mean, it's like, it's the one, humanity's one salvation. Like, I think word's going to get around because probably someone out there ran their mouth. Maybe there was something else to that. Like I said, there was a little between Melanie, almost like she might have leaked that, but I'm not sure. But it also just shows you that those decisions obviously came on high. That it was Wilford that was like, oh, gun down all these people. Like, yeah, it's like, all right, obviously people are trying to bust onto the train, just kill them, mow them down. At first, use whatever force you have to if necessary. I don't think we ever found out either why Alex didn't show up. Either that was something on Wilford's part, or maybe that was maybe just her family didn't get there in time. Well, I think more so they did kind of explain that, like, the reason why is because her Alex's grandparents, Melanie's parents, didn't want to leave. So that's the reason why. But it's also like, regardless of them not wanting to come, you left us behind. Like, we could have been there. You could have been there with me, especially because they were kind of content. They were some of the people that were content with just staying behind and dying, like some others were. What I also thought was interesting too is that under these circumstances she sees Andre as well, which he's kind of poking at her about, it's like, oh, now you're in a desperate situation like you were, you put us in, when it came to the tail and everything. He's like, not trying to rub it in though. She's like, you are rubbing it. He's like, honestly, you're right. I am rubbing it in a little bit. But honestly, it's also like, obviously, turning to cannibalism isn't too bad. He's like, hey, I'm not judging. Let's not forget the tail went a little cannibalistic for a while too. So it's like, that's why he specifically was saying, hey, I'm not going to judge you. You do what you need to survive. Like, as a tailie, like, that means that desperation to survive. Like, he understands that more so than anything. Once again, it's interesting who her mind goes to, who she needs to go to, because I think she needs Wilford. Wilford represents all her, like, doubts about herself and all the doubts about her actions that she's made, but also, like I said, I think she needs someone antagonistic, but I think she got Andre in her head because it's like they were antagonistic, but he was also an ally because he's also the side of her that's like, who's that person that in my head that represents survival and doing what you need to, and who would be understanding, and Andre popped in her head. I even love, like, later on, like, because at first there's a whole thing of, like, the cracker thing, because at first I was like, wait, is there actually, like, because they had a daughter, so I was like, is their daughter actually there? I was wondering if that ended up being the case, but I was like, no, they died, so I feel like she would have died too. I was like, not unless she ended up surviving. But I was like, why? What's up with that cracker being missing? Because it's like, I must have, like, she was like, I must have eaten it, but he was like, Wilfred was like, you didn't do that. She's like, he's like, you don't believe that. She's like, I don't. So it's like, where did it go? Turns out it was a rat, because there's a pocket in the wall where, like, at some point there was kind of like a break, and obviously there's like a lot of heat. I'm not scientific enough to know the exact things of just what happened, but I guess it's just like it hit like a spot where there was a crack in the ground that kind of let up heat. So that particular spot, probably one of the few spots on Earth that's actually not completely frozen over. And because of that, those rats were able to survive. Sadly, those other two weren't aware of that. If they were, maybe they could have, granted, it benefited Melanie that they weren't aware of it, because those rats were allowed to live there and procreate, and now she has a food supply. Which I even love that, like, immediately when they caught it, she's like, yeah, Melanie, because he was actually like, oh, like, look at this trap you're making. It's like, now you're thinking like a telling, and her high-fiving, but him not being real. I was like, oh, that's sad. But him be like, yeah, I know some good recipes on how to cook her up. Him, but it's like, she's like, I have other plans. I was like, what? And she kind of dips him in like oil or whatever and gets him running. I'm like, are you gonna follow him back? Like, what do you do? I was like, oh, maybe you're gonna follow him to some other rats, which it worked out in the end. So she ended up finding a much larger food supply, so thought that was really fascinating. But also, it gave her this opportunity. Also, gave her a lot of chances to amend stuff with Alex in her head, because she's like, the side of her that whether it's wishful thinking or maybe it is part of her brain thinking, hey, this is what Alex would say, maybe. Or, yeah, I think it is hopeful thinking. Like, I'd hope that Alex would forgive me and be understanding of why I left her behind. She didn't have much choice. It's like, I think because of the night card situation, as well as him threatening, leave your family behind. At that point, it's like Melanie and Ben had already decided, we're leaving this mother effer behind. But they were waiting for the opportunity. They just needed Alex to get on board. That's what they were waiting for, but they didn't have enough time. People were storming the gates and trying to storm the train. And it's like they needed to do it when Wilford wasn't on the train. I thought we were dealing with a situation of they knocked him out or something and then they threw him off the train. It's like, no, he literally wasn't on the train at that time and they bounced and left him behind. I think it's actually kind of fascinating because Ben's the one that kind of convinced her to kind of go ahead. It's like this was kind of their plan, but it's also like, I know you don't want to leave her behind, but you have no choice. Like, if we don't go now, we cannot let him be in charge of the last of humanity. So obviously that came back to bite them in the ass in more ways than one. But it's a situation where Ben was leaving people behind too, so he knew where Melanie was coming from. But it was a thing of, for the sake of humanity, like, forgive me, So, but then obviously we kind of get the other side of like last episode when it was like, we didn't get an update from Melanie. Well, it turns out in that particular time frame, the wind and stuff were getting too, and like the antenna of sorts like ended up falling down, so she had to restore that, and luckily she was able to get everything back online. And we also see like that was the balloon they didn't get information from, I'm assuming, because then later on we see balloon 11 and 12, so I'm assuming like the last one we saw was 11, and so this kind of explains what happened to Melanie in that time frame. But also got back all the data, so I was like, okay, it all worked out. It was all worth it in the end. And it's just kind of like, all right, cut down to the wire. It's like, because I think it was like the lady who had cut her wrist, it's like she only lasted 5 months before she kind of gave in. But then like Melanie was like, I only need to make it a month. And then eventually it was like, I just need to go 2 more weeks, What was also interesting too was like the notions he was having about like, that whole, let's not forget his whole thing is about getting people to slit their wrists for him. Like, just the way he was talking about it, even Bellamy was like, what the hell are you talking about? Once again, it's just his whole weird perspective on like power, like his whole thing of having power over people like that. But it came down to the wire. Hey, Snowpiercer returning. It's been a month, and we see that there's 2 X's after the date. It's like she's not able to get in contact with Snowpiercer. She thinks it's all over. Because the whole conversation, too, is like, well, you don't have your sled anymore, so, like, how are you going to get back? She's like, I'll walk if I have to, But she kind of lost hope because she couldn't get in contact with Snowpiercer. And in that moment, I'm like, things must have gone even more. Granted, things were already going sideways the last time we checked. Things must have really gotten bad. Because I think at that time, they were, like, 3 days away from Melanie, wasn't it? Like, it was like, 3 days, and we're going to circle back to Melanie, I think, if I remember correctly from last episode. So that was probably like on the 27th, maybe, I would assume, or maybe the 26th, whatever the case may be. So that means in those couple days, even more so because obviously we go like 2 days past Snowpiercer supposedly coming and pick her up. So a lot went down in that time frame, and I'm sure we're going to get that insight in like all that went down in those next two in the next episode. But Melanie had kind of given up hope, more so that she, talking to Alex, like, I'm sorry, like, I left you before, but she's like, I was hoping and thought this time would be different. But Alex understands, like, hugging her and being like, I know, like, Snowpiercer wouldn't be where it is, wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for you. So she's like, I understand. And in that moment, just like Melanie, like tearing up, holding her daughter, and in that moment, like Alex turning into like the little girl she ended up sadly having to leave behind, It was again like the biggest regrets, And she kind of thought it was in until she felt like the rumble, and I was like, hey, Snowpiercer, I gotta go. Even leaving like the thing she was dragging behind, she's like, Snowpiercer, you have to slow down. You're like, oh boy. I'm like, are you going to be able, I was like, at those speeds, there's no just hopping on. I was like, this doesn't look good. I was like, yeah, Snowpiercer is under Wilford's control now. And even at the back of, in Big Alice, you see Alex banging on the train being like, Mom, like, obviously this isn't what she wanted, but it's exactly what Wilford wanted, despite, the potential, even more some. Because my initial thought was like, oh, he's going to use Icy Bob to try and take her out before she could get back on the train. It's like, well, this is even more poetic for him because it's like, oh, I don't have to kill you. I'm going to leave you to die on your own. Especially sucks because obviously she doesn't have the supplies to keep going. Granted, who knows how many rats are left. It might have been enough rats. She even said, that's the irony behind it. Like, oh, I just need to last 1 month. And that ends up not being the case. So we just see her kind of faltering. It's like, when everything seemed it was hopeful again for her to kind of get left behind like that. Hopefully the situation of Snowpiercer can flip and they can get back control and get back to Melanie. Because at least Alex sees and knows, like, my mom's still alive. We have to go back for her. She's still out there. Like, she still has the hope of humanity with her. Which obviously Wilford's in a position to dash that hope because it's like, well, it's too late. Well, Melanie probably can lie to everyone and be like, Melanie died. We know that for sure. Maybe he exposed the fact is that they were out of contact with Melanie and that kind of changed the tides. Like, maybe he kind of exposed their lies in that regard. I don't know. Obviously, like, maybe Alex finds out about the future updates. Like, oh, we're still getting stuff. My mom's still alive. But Wilford probably shut that down. Of like, you keep that to your damn self. Don't tell anybody. Pure speculation on my part. But, it's going to be interesting to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.